Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. These are your DC comics for the week of August 31st, 2021. I can't believe it's going to be September, man. Like, we're approaching the end of the year already. This year has flown by.
It's crazy.
I'm already starting to think about, best of 2021 episode. And I told myself, okay, this year, whenever I read a book and I think, oh, I've got to remember this for the best of, I'm going to start the list early so I don't have to go back through every book I read. Here we are almost in September. I haven't done it.
Yeah, no, it's been a crazy year, man, and another year for change for comic books. 2020 was the year of the spec market and dramatic changes, and 2021 just seems to continue the trend with Substack and creator-owned and indie and convulsions of the big two, and yeah, new blood in DC Comics and interesting times.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I was just reading an article earlier today about how there's still shortages and supply chain is still nowhere near back to normal. Like, for example, Toyota is cutting their output of cars. They're cutting it by 40%. So they're only going to make, and they already had cut back in 2020 from what they had made in 2019. And now they're saying 2021 or 2022 rather, they're only going to make 60% of the cars they made in 2021. So yeah, supply chain continues to be a factor. And the reason I mention that is because we saw recently that DC announced, because of supply chain issues, they have a ton of books that they are having to delay.
Yeah.
And one of those is Wonder Girl. Now, we talked about Wonder Girl last week, not realizing that it had been pushed a week. So it actually comes out this week on the 31st of August. But if you're curious about what our thoughts on Wonder Girl were, go back and listen. If you go to the Comic Boom YouTube channel, Rocky's got the timestamps there. You can jump right to the Wonder Girl portion and listen to what we say. Now, neither one of us were particularly impressed with it. I mentioned how it already feels like it's taking forever. They've pushed it back several times. And I've talked about it a bunch of times on the show. When a comic gets delayed, how it loses momentum, it loses readership, it loses sales. So this comic, in my mind, is already struggling. And now this issue got pushed back a week. So it's coming out the last week of August. Issue 4 is pushed back to the middle of November.
Crazy.
Like 10 weeks from now. Who is going to care about this Wonder Girl series by the time that comes out? In my mind, and I get it. DC, like, this is obviously out of their control. And, based on the fact that Joelle Jones is writing and doing the art, I'm sure it's taking her longer. They should have gave her more lead time, in my mind, because it already seems like it's taking about 6 weeks per issue. And then on top of that, now supply chain problems. So yeah, in my mind, it's the death knell for this. Yeah. Plus, didn't the Yara Flor rumored TV show that got axed, right? So that's not coming anymore.
Well, you got to wonder with supply chain issues, though, if they're gonna at some point they're gonna have to abandon their same day physical release / digital release. I mean, at some point, if supply chain issues continue to get worse, at some point they might have to release them digitally and maybe just forego the physical whenever the supply chain abates.
Yeah, they talked about that, last year when Diamond went on hiatus, and they seemed very reluctant to do that. And that was their whole impetus behind leaving Diamond and going with a different distributor. That was kind of their out. The fact that Diamond wasn't delivering comics, it let DC get out of their contract a little early. They seem to not want to do that only because, retailers feel that really puts them kind of behind the 8 ball, right? Like, hey, it's not fair. If digitally gets released first, it's going to cannibalize our sales. I personally don't believe that is true.
It's not true. I don't believe it is either.
Yeah, but you can't convince retailers of that. They 100% believe that. Because that's the same claim that they made when DC said, okay, we're going to go on the same day, right? We're
Yeah.
gonna release day and date. And comic shops are like, no, you need to do like you, because it used to be previously they got a week or two, maybe a month, where it was released in print first, and then people it was available digitally. Um, but I agree with you. And here's the other thing about comics, right? Like so many times the complaint we hear about comics right now is they're so expensive. When you talk about removing the printing cost and removing the cost to ship these things and store them and whatnot, like that's a lot more profit. I think you don't need to sell these books for $4 or $5 a piece. And I'm not saying you go all digital because there's still a collectability factor. But I mean, we've talked about it a ton of times on the podcast. Maybe you go quarterly. Maybe you do something a little bit different. But I don't necessarily have the answers. But it wouldn't surprise me, Rocky, if we got there eventually. But I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, unless there's some catastrophic,
Yeah.
paper shortage or all the printers around the world get blown up or something like that. But I mean, DC already does some stuff that's digital only, or they call it digital first because they don't want to say digital only because they always want people to think that eventually you'll be able to get it in your hands. And that kind of goes with what we were talking about last time with Substack, where these creators, they retain the rights to print these books at some point. And so, yeah, they're delivered to your email box, or you go to your Substack account and you sign in and you can read them there. And at some point, they're going to be printed. At what point, we don't know. And if you're curious enough, and I read almost everything digitally these days. It's just because I get my press preview copies digitally, and I read stuff before it comes out on Wednesday. Plus, even if it's older stuff, I have it on my iPad, Comixology, Marvel Unlimited, whatever. It's just easier.
Well,
I can carry around thousands of comics in my laptop bag on
yeah.
my big 12.9-inch iPad. It's just so much easier. But there was a time where I thought, no, I love the feel of the paper more than the feel of the paper. I love the smell. Like when you walk into a comic shop that has a good selection of back issues, it
Mm.
just has that smell. And that's a nostalgic smell for me. So I don't know that I would ever stop buying physical comics. As long as physical comics are being printed, I will buy them. Um,
Well, I
but
tell you, I'd really like to know. I'd like to know if, like, for example, I Am Batman was, or the original Batman Second Son was released digitally first, and then 4 issues were released. The 4 issue miniseries was physically released. I'd be curious to know the sales digitally compared to the physical copies, and they were not released at the same time. And same goes for Infinite Frontier Secret Files. Those 6 issues were released digitally, followed by it was encapsulated in Infinite Frontier Secret Files. I'd like to know the comparison in sales between those two things, and because I really question and maybe DC has the numbers. Obviously, they do, but I really do question, as you do, the so-called advisability of I don't know why they're so reluctant to separate the two, because it's a different market. People who read comics digitally, they're a different market than the speculators and buy the physical copy buyers. I mean, it's I'm convinced of that, but I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe,
you're really talking about three different types of customers. You have the customers that only buy stuff digitally, don't care about the collectability. You could even lump impulse buyers or buying an issue here or there for 99 cents when things go on sale. Then you do have the hardcore collectors, the Wednesday warriors that are there every week picking up books, and that's a completely separate market. And they don't read anything digitally. And then you have the hybrid guys like me. I read everything digitally, but I'm buying, and not everything is released digitally. So I should say that. Like Bad Idea, they don't release any books digitally. So obviously I read their books physically. But I kind of have a foot in each world, so I can see both perspectives. I agree with you. Like I wish we knew digital sales. We never have gotten real true numbers of digital sales. We've gotten some anecdotal evidence here and there, but we've never really been given numbers. In a way, I think digital is a bigger piece internationally than people realize, but I think it's a smaller piece than the retailers actually think it is. I think unfortunately that digital readership is small enough that even if you did release stuff digitally first, that some people would still wait, the extra 2 weeks or whatever it would be to go and pick it up at the comic shop.
yeah.
Um, Especially people that have long runs on stuff, like and I get it. I'm hypocritical when it comes to this, because when it comes to my Action Comics run, as much as I didn't like the Brian Michael Bendis uh, written stories when he was writing Action Comics, I'm trying to literally put together an entire run of that series. And it might be a pipe dream. I know I'll never own an Action Comics #1, but I've got a couple of reprints of it. But even some of those, below 100, anything below 100, super expensive, and I may never own any of those either. But I can easily afford each new issue of Action Comics that comes out to continue that run. So regardless of who's writing it or how bad the stories are, I'm going to buy it because I want to keep that run going, even if I'm not reading it or I'm just reading it digitally. So anyway, that's more than enough about digital and Wonder Girl. And again, I just wonder how much that, 2.5 months between issues. That's just insane. And it's not like it's some crazy like doomsday clock, right? Where it's the sales juggernaut where people are going to show up for it. By the mid-November, people are going to have forgotten. You and I probably won't even remember what the hell happened in Wonder Girl number 3 or 4 or whatever it is that's out this week. So
it's unfortunate.
Yeah. So anyway, let's start with the first book. A lot of annuals this week, which is kind of strange for, well, I guess it is and it isn't. A lot of times when there's the last week of the last Wednesday of the month, that's what they'll do, especially if it's an extra Wednesday, or in this case, an extra Tuesday. And this is the 5th Tuesday of the month of August. So, most things are on a 4-week cycle, but given the rest of the creative team a little bit of a break and the ability to get caught up. So first thing that we're starting off with is Midnighter Annual 2021. I don't know why they just call it Midnighter Special. How do you have an annual when you don't have a regular series going on? Obviously, the backup in Action Comics is what this story in this issue concludes. So it's written by Becky Cloonan and Michael W. Conrad, and this goes all the way back to Future State, Superman World of War, when this story started with Midnighter and Andrew Chojan and Mr. Miracle and whatnot. So Michael Avon Oeming is still the artist, as he has been throughout. I was kind of hoping we get a different artist for this last chapter, but unfortunately we haven't. Taki Soma is the colorist. Dave Sharp does letters. And the only reason I say that about Michael Avon Oeming's art is, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, I'm sure, but I just don't think he draws superhero action that well. His storytelling is fine from panel to panel. He definitely has a very stylized sense when it comes to anatomy. If you're familiar with his art at all, you'll know that this is not like anatomically correct, and the proportions and whatnot are not exactly right. He exaggerates things for effect, and I don't mind his sense of storytelling. I think he has a very good sense of storytelling, actually, but his style is just not a style that's ever really resonated with me. All that being said, I thought that and maybe it's because we get such a big chunk of story here, but getting a big chunk of story to conclude the Midnighter story and close that time loop and actually allow Midnighter to break out of that time loop so that the future is uncertain and that possible future that we saw in Future State may not come to pass. And that's not a big surprise because we've always been told Future State's a possible future or a potential future. So all that worked really well for me. And I thought it was okay. It ended up being a story that, while I probably won't go back and reread it, I think in the end it ends up making sense. Now, again, if this was drawn by somebody whose art I really enjoyed, I think I would go back and reread it in one sitting to kind of get a better feel and a better understanding of exactly what went down. But again, that Avon Oeming art is just not an art style that that really speaks to me. So again, I thought it made sense in the end. The argument could be made that the story doesn't really end because again, we break out of that loop. But the way the story ends with Andrew Trojan and his assistant, who's basically housing his consciousness at this point, it definitely leaves the story open for more to come. But I got to be honest, I hope there isn't anymore because I probably wouldn't read it anyway. So anyway, what did you think, Rocky? Did you think it made sense in the end?
Well, I mean, straight up. Well, first of all, we've been reviewing every issue. So does it make sense to us? Kind of, sort of. Yeah, sure. I had to read it multiple times again. Let me just. I'm not trying to avoid your question. It's a seemingly simple question. Does this story make sense? And while sure, I mean, in the sense that it's a time paradox. I generally love time travel tales, but it actually occurred to me for the first time that reading this annual, we finally get to this annual. And by the way, the title of this issue isn't revealed until page 22. There's 42 pages in this comic. You have to get to page 22 before you finally get what the title of this issue is. So you can tell that I think that they intended this to be two separate issues, or they must have, I think at one time intended for this to be a series of another two backups. But I get the strong sense that they're cramming all this into this annual just to put this out of its misery. But that's me pretending I'm Mr. Editor. But in any event, this reminded me a little bit of Groundhog Day, but actually it's definitely not Groundhog Day. This is Midnighter who's trapped in a bootstrap paradox, because what happened in Future State is that he basically wants to stop Andrew Trojan, who we know from in Future State, he is going to ultimately become like this all-powerful, this basically living computer who abandons his humanity. And so Midnighter sends his future consciousness into the past. And so Midnighter's future consciousness is occupying his present body. Meanwhile, the future consciousness of Adrian Trojan is occupying Midnighter's mind in the past as well. And there's some good attempts here at where a story could lie, because Midnighter never opened up with Apollo. Becky, Cloonan, and Michael Conrad, they do their best to try to create to build on the relationship between Midnighter and Apollo, and the fact that Midnighter doesn't confide in Apollo and tell him that he's got this other supervillain's sharing his mind with a supervillain from the future, and he doesn't share with Apollo that he's actually not his present self. The present Midnighter is actually trapped in the future. I mean, it's crazy, and we never got a sense. I mean, it was revealed here that Midnighter doesn't want to tell Apollo that, because in every time he's relived this timeline, Midnighter says that in every timeline when he opens up to Apollo and tells Apollo the truth, that they end up failing, they end up losing. And there's some good character moments here. And unfortunately, I'll be very blunt. I didn't need any of the previous backup stories. It could have all been just, had this been structured and paced better, this one annual could have told the entire story in my mind. It really could have. And it could have been done, frankly. Right. What's that?
I said, yeah, you're right. 100%. Yeah. I agree.
Because this is, I read this annual and all of a sudden a couple of light bulbs went off my head. Oh, well, that's what this is. It never really occurred to me that this was, that Midnighter had relived this multiple times. This is a bootstrap paradox. I understood that he's doing this all for the first time, but apparently he's lived this more than once. That's news to me. I never got that impression in previous issues, but hey, I guess it is what it is. But in any event, it actually gets near the end here. Adrian Trojan ends up being three people occupying the mind of Midnighter: the present and future Andre Trojan, as well as Midnighter's future self, all in Midnighter's body. Midnighter ends up being sent back to the future. So the future Midnighter, the future consciousness is in present Midnighter, who's sent back into the future, where he's got both Andre, the past and present Andre Trojan's consciousness trapped in his mind, and then he kills himself in the future. And you think, well, okay, the bad guy's done, Andre Trojan. The present consciousness of Andre Trojan and the future consciousness of Andre Trojan are killed by future Midnighter, because future Midnighter kills himself. But then it's revealed at the end, like you said, that, well, I guess the backup plan that Andre Trojan has been bragging that he had, even in the event that he lost, comes to fruition. And Andre Trojan's minions, another one of his helpers, actually must have made a copy of Andre Trojan's two consciousness, two minds. and he's still alive. So therefore, I believe fully that Midnighter lost. Andre Trojan is still alive. The future state can still happen because Andre Trojan is still alive. We've come all this way only for it to be discovered that Midnighter, in fact, lost. Period. He just plain lost. He was outsmarted by Andre Trojan. And I gotta tell you, like, I agree with you with the art. I'm not going to sit here and continue to say, I'll just say that Michael von Oeming, this isn't the right series for him. This did not work. This was the wrong combination of writer and artist. It did not work. And the pacing and the structure of this story was just off from the beginning. And this just doesn't work. I'm just glad this story is over, and I don't want this to be referred to at the end. Of all the stories for Future State that we reviewed, I'm generally positive on all of them. I think DC's done a good job. Future State was hit and miss, but all the stories leading into Future State, from Marika Tamaki to Tynion's The Magistrate to Suicide Squad to Teen Titans Academy, all those stories are taking shape nicely moving into Future State. But except for this one, even the Superman, Philip Kennedy Johnson, I mean, we're moving toward War World. But this one has been, I think, a significant miss, and it doesn't bode well for this. So I would prefer just to forget this. But there you have it.
Here's the thing. Up until this annual, I would have said that I agree with that. Like, it's been a mess. It doesn't need to exist. It should be erased. It hasn't worked. But like you said, in this annual, and again, maybe it goes to the fact that we got such a huge chunk of story in this annual, to me, it finally came together to the point that there's interesting concepts here. And if it were done correctly, I am curious. And I'm more curious about sort of the relationship. I think the best part of this story was the interaction between the Shiloh Norman, Mr. Miracle, and Midnighter. So that would be more of what I would want to see. I could really care less about the Apollo Midnighter thing. That's never interested in me. But the number one thing you'd have to have, I think, is just a different artist, because to me, that's the part that it's a chore to read because I don't care for the art. And maybe it's just goes to what a great job Fico Ossio and Brandon Easton and the creative team for Mr. Miracle, Source of Freedom have done. That's the part of the story. All of a sudden, I'm this huge Shiloh Norman fan, and I want more stories with him. So maybe that's it. All right, well, let's move on. Next book we're going to talk about. This is a big one. It's one a lot of people have been waiting for. I've had mixed feelings about the fact that there's another big event starting. Feels like we just finished Joker War, and now we have Fear State. So Fear State Alpha is out this week. It kicks off the Fear State event. It's written by James Tynion. The art is by Riccardo Federici, Italian artist, mostly known for his cover work at DC. And I thought his art, it blew me away. Like, his cover work is so good, but they're static images, and a lot of times when you try to make that transition, maybe the storytelling isn't as good. Maybe, from panel to panel, things can get lost. I was very impressed. I don't think I've ever seen him do any interior work, at least not in a comic that I've read. So while I was going through and reading this, I didn't realize it was him. And I probably should have, just based on the line work and sort of the cross hatching and textures that he gives us. But when I got to the credits page and I saw it was him, I was very impressed. So I thought that was done very, very well. The colors by Chris Sotomayor, letters are by Clayton Cowles. So, I've talked at length about how I'm sort of tired of fascist villains. I'm not a fan of the Magistrate as this villain group. Wasn't a big fan. Didn't enjoy the Magistrate story in Future State as much as Rocky did. And again, I just kept going back to, here we are. We just finished Joker War, and now we're getting another big event. And I think I said either last week or the week before, why the hell would anybody live in Gotham? At this point, you've got to be insane or like a masochist to live in Gotham. But Tynion, to his credit, he actually sort of addresses that. And it's exactly because Gotham is the way it is, and because it just had this traumatic event with Joker War, that now this Fear State is happening. Simon Saint, he just wants power. We know he's somewhat of a mustache-twirling villain. He just wants power, and he's recruiting Jonathan Crane to basically level up Gotham City, right? Like the whole theory is, we'll look at what Bruce Wayne had to overcome, look at the fear and the trauma in his childhood, and look how it purified him and allowed him to evolve into Batman. Let's take that same principle and apply it to an entire city. That's Simon Saint's thinking, right? Like the way you fix Gotham, crucible by fire, as it were. Now, Tynion's always been a giant Scarecrow fan and thinks that Scarecrow needs to be leveled up in terms of being a more powerful villain. He feels like he's never really gotten his due. Think of people like Joker in the last 20 years, let's say, who've really leveled up in power and become a more dangerous threat. Scott Snyder did it with the Riddler in Year Zero, Batman the Year Zero, and Tom King kind of added to that in the War of Jokes and Riddles. And the Riddler's now much more, he's a much bigger threat than he used to be, right? Where it was just kind of a gimmick and felt like it was much more the Riddler from sort of the Batman TV show. Riddler's an A-level threat now. Tynion's bringing the Penguin back, right, to that higher level instead of just being this corrupt casino owner. Well, he's doing the same thing with Scarecrow. He thinks Scarecrow should be, and maybe it goes back to Tynion's love of horror. In my mind, that Scarecrow is one of the more sort of horror-centric, especially with the way Jorge Jimenez has been drawing him lately, and the way that Tynion portrays him. So yeah, I could see it. I've never been a big Scarecrow fan. I could kind of take him or leave him. But everything that's happening in here in Fear State is making sense. And the other thing that I really, really enjoyed beyond the art and the colors, which again are absolutely fantastic. Like and maybe it's because Riccardo Federici is slow. Maybe that's why he does just covers. Man, if he can give us one or two books like this a year, I'd be happy with that. This man needs to be doing some interiors, though. Do something beyond just the covers. He's not an artist that I buy every cover, but I do buy a few here or there that I really enjoy. But man, if this is the talent the guy can bring to interiors, because the thing that is most impressive to me about his art is how emotionally impactful it is, especially in the scene between Simon Saint and Jonathan Crane inside Arkham Asylum, because this is a flashback before A-Day and all that. It's just so impactful. There's so much emotion there, and you feel it. The other thing that Tynion does really, really well in this issue is this is the setup issue, right? This is the bookend. We're getting Fear State Alpha, and then at the end we'll get Fear State Omega. Those are the two issues that officially kick off the event and then end the event. So we know they're going to play throughout all the Batman titles. So Batman, Catwoman, Nightwing, Detective Comics. So there's a lot, Harley Quinn. So there's a lot of different moving parts. There's a lot of different aspects to the story. We've seen some house ads in the last couple of weeks where Tynion has talked about, okay, this is sort of the portion of the story that's going to happen in Harley Quinn with Poison Ivy. Here's the portion that's going to happen in Nightwing with the Anti-Oracle and whatnot. And so, different titles in the Bat family are going to cover different portions of the story. But for these bookend titles, it's got to be everything. We've got to get a little taste of each storyline. And when you do that in one of these kind of bookend issues that start and end series, it can feel disjointed. It can feel like it's not paced really well because you're getting little chunks, the beginnings in this case, of a lot of different disparate storylines. Tynion makes it all happen seamlessly. It all makes sense. It all comes from one seed, Simon Saint and the Peacemaker 01 being sort of out of his mind with fear toxin and all that. I think sort of sets up really, really well. This is one of the best sort of bookend starts to one of these kind of events that I've seen in a long time. The parts with Sean Mahoney, Peacekeeper 1, done really, really well. We get our first look at Anti-Oracle, that interaction between Simon Saint and Jonathan Crane, like I mentioned. We see Batman sort of in the clutches of Scarecrow. So I thought all of that, the setup, it is very much a setup issue, but it's all set up just very, very well. Everything you need to know is right here. If you haven't been reading any Batman since, I don't know, way back when Tom King was writing it or Scott Snyder or whoever, Um, you can pick this up. You can pick up Fear State Alpha and just read this, and Tynion tells you everything you need to know so you can dive into Fear State if you so choose to, join this event as fall is getting underway and Halloween is around the corner, and see what's happening in Gotham City. So these aren't easy issues to write in my mind, because you are having to basically start a bunch of storylines, kick off a bunch of different storylines for the various Bat titles. But I thought he did an excellent job. I was so impressed with this. I'm actually looking forward somewhat to Fear State now. I'm not over the moon excited for it by any means, but I was sort of dreading it. I was like, God, I just feel like I just finished Joker War. Now we got this other giant event, and I'm just sort of tired of it. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm curious. I'm in. I want to see what happens. I want to see how these storylines play out. So I got to give Tynion a ton of credit, and Ricardo Federici rather, and Chris Sotomayor on the colors. I think everybody in this issue did a fantastic job. I was very, very impressed with this issue. What did you think, Rocky?
Yeah, I like it. It was really good. I apologize for those people who are watching. I'm just having some issues here.
Yeah, usually you're able to flip through the pages.
Well, yeah, and it's for some reason, unfortunately, that's not what's happening here. I don't know why. In any event, I'll figure it out. In any event, no, I agree with you. I appreciate all your comments. Make complete sense to me. One of the things that I love the entire premise of the fact that focusing on fear. The fact that pushing Gotham to its, just like Batman overcomes fear and he becomes a better Batman because of it. Scarecrow almost like, Dr. Jonathan Crane takes credit for how great Batman is. And, it makes sense. I like the thought that Tynion put into this, that Dr. Jonathan Crane is more of a genius than he's given credit for. He's put far more thought into fear and the idea of a fear state than I think a lot of people would normally give him credit for. And I really like you said at the beginning, when Simon Saint actually approaches him, and unfortunately it's not working, but I don't know. I'm just gonna leave it here. It's not working, but sorry, I'm just losing my focus a little bit here. But I love, like you said, when with the focus and the psychology of the fear state, and how Simon Saint approaches Dr. Jonathan Crane, how they incorporate the Insanity Collective, how they are creating fear, and it's got nothing to do with fear toxin, but it's about heightening the fear to such a state naturally enhancing that fear, and then dropping the bomb of the toxin, of the Scarecrow toxin. It's like boom, let nature take its course. Let fear be that natural mind killer, and then have everything drop. And like you said, how everything seamlessly flows into Future State now. It's like you and I, we've said it before, how Future State almost was, it's almost a curse as opposed to a blessing in disguise, because what Future State did is that it just seemed to drop too many bombs right away, and we didn't need it. I would almost have preferred if all this would have been a natural, organic build up to Future State. This might have been a better story, but I'm still enjoying it. It's just a little bit odd how they did it. I hope DC never does this again, having a Future State where they drop a bunch of revelations and then we go back into the past and then build up the Future State. I wish they would not have done that. I would have preferred this been organically developed. Having said that, I am enjoying the journey. I'm enjoying the ride. Like I said, I like how things are going here, and and there's so many moving parts, like you said, so many moving parts with Alleytown, with Catwoman, with Ghostmaker, with Harley Quinn, with Poison Ivy, with this is a rich tapestry of multiple characters across multiple titles, and we got writers at the top of their game here. We got Tynion on Batman, we got Tamaki on Detective, who's kicking ass. We've got Stephanie Phillips on Harley Quinn, which I think, she's doing an admirable job there. We got Ram V on Catwoman, and all these narratives seem to be syncing relatively well. I think Harley's a little bit out of whack there a little bit, if I'm being brutally honest. But even that, I'm happy I'm happy where this is. I'm gonna miss Tynion. I really am. I'm really gonna miss him. Joshua Williamson has some pretty big shoes to fill come November.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other two books you didn't mention, John Ridley on the next Batman, also a very talented writer, and then of course Tom
Right.
Taylor on Nightwing that ties in as well. And yeah, one of those things that I forgot to mention, I'm glad you brought it up. One of the best parts about the scene with Jonathan Crane and Simon Saint, when Crane is basically giving his price, like, yes, Simon Saint, I will help you out. I will help establish a fear state in Gotham City. I want $25 million or whatever it is, and a great lab and chemicals and my costume back. But the most important thing that I want credit, right? He wants
Yeah.
credit. He feels like he's never been given his due. So that's very telling. And I think a perfect way for Tynion to level up Jonathan Crane. Because I do feel like he's always been second rate or maybe even third rate villain in the comics. I feel like the most malevolent, sort of successful Jonathan Crane ever was actually in the Batman Begins movie, where he's feels like much more of a threat than he ever did in the comics. So, all right, well, up on to the next book. It's Static Season 1, Episode number 3, written by Vita Ayala. We have pencils, inks, and colors by Nicholas Draper Ivey on pages 1 through 12, and then we have pencils and inks by Chris Cross on pages 13 through 20, and the colors on 13 through 20 are by Will Quintana. Letters throughout are by Ann World Design. So bit of a different look to the book than we've had so far. And I don't know that it worked as well for me, but what did you think of this issue, Rocky?
Can you see me flip through the pages here?
Yeah, it's working.
It's working? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought this is getting a little bit derivative for me. It's a little bit kind of predictable, but overall the story it's not bad. It feels a little bit derivative because we got sort of like, I mean, all these students that got their powers from the Big Bang, because there was this protest. There was a protest on the street, and it became known as the Big Bang. And there was this corporation that used some sort of secret sort of gas to break up the protest, and it resulted in a lot of the people, a lot of the teenagers at the protest gained superpowers. Of course, Static was one of them, and a lot of his friends gained powers as well, including his arch nemesis. And ultimately, one of the students here decides to betray the rest of them and turn in the other students who gain their powers from the Big Bang. And so it's building up with something. It's building up to something big, clearly. I think where the strengths of this issue lie that I think really resonate for me was the relationship between Static and his father. And, one of the things that I hear a lot about, and of course, this isn't, what do I know about the African American community in the United States? I just know what I'm told and what I see on social media. But I know there's a lot of talk about there's not enough father figures in the lives of a lot of young black men, and it's really great to see this. This is a character with strong family values, raised by a really great family, and his relationship with his father really comes to the forefront here. You really see how it makes the lead character that much more interesting, and a fairly, you can tell his upbringing is very different than a lot of his classmates, and in particular, it does fly over into the other character, Hardware, and who gave him the whereabouts of his secret hideout. And because at the beginning of this issue, the police are looking for, or actually, I think it's Metcalf is the character's name, but in any event, the character that plays Metcalf or Hardware, he gave Static the location of his sort of like a secret headquarters, and the police are he has to escape the police, and ultimately he does make it back home, and he ends up with we're learning a little bit more about the power set of Static. how he can manipulate liquid metal, and I'm still trying to get a handle on exactly what Static's powers are, and he seems to be able to manipulate liquid metal. It responds to his energy. He calls it kinetic metal. So I like that I'm learning a little bit more about Static's powers because, I'm ignorant. I'm just getting to know Static here. I didn't read his series back in '96 or in the New 52. He had a series. I never really read it, to be quite blunt. So I'm getting to know him for the first time here, and I'm really enjoying it. The art here is fantastic. I found it a little bit funny that Static is doing his own sewing. He's got sewing skills. I thought that was kind of comical. And the fact that he actually does a pretty good job on his own, just coming up with his own costume. And it wasn't his mother that did it, it was himself. So I thought that was kind of comical. There were some nice character moments here. Again, great character moments with his dad. And, we're really starting to, I like his dad. He's a cool guy. And it's refreshing to see, that we're not seeing a bunch of dysfunction here. This is a good, high functioning, good kid who was raised right. And, finally the problems don't come from this kid's upbringing. It comes from, of course, Static's friends and what have you. And he's even got good friends that confront him this issue and apologize to him and say that they're there to support him. So this is actually a feel good issue. I really liked it. I thought they did I think Vita Ayala does a pretty good job here scripting this. And at the end, we have this organization that is working with, I forget what's this villain's name? Do you remember this villain's name?
I want to say like Hot Stuff or
Hot Streak or something, or
Heat Stroke.
Heat Stroke.
Yeah.
I don't know, but he's kind of a jerk.
Oh, he's a huge jerk. Hot Streak, I think.
Hot Streak, yeah.
Yeah. If you look at the blurb for next issue, Hot Streak makes a house call again. Yeah, Hot Streak. Yeah, I guess when it comes to villains, you're doing a good job when they engender a reaction.
Yeah.
And I want to see this guy get his ass whooped, to be honest with you. He's a punk ass. Like,
yeah.
Total scumbag. And you just want to see him get his comeuppance. So, I don't like him at all, but that's it's in a good way, right?
Yeah, well, he almost killed a family too. That's what I can't understand why they don't press charges against him. I mean, he practically almost killed the entire family by burning them to death, their house and everything, and how they just sort of allow him be at school. I think in that respect, maybe it lacks a little bit of verisimilitude. I find that very, very hard to believe that this, like you say, I mean, calling him a punk, you're right. He's evil. And it was more than just random vandalism in the previous issues. He literally tried to burn the house down, burn the family to death. So this isn't like a bully at school. This is something far more serious. And it is rather extraordinary, what he's managed to get away with. And now obviously, this corporation has a lot of power over the police. There's a lot of corruption here. The fact that they can get away with this, which just raises the stakes for our lead character. I'm really curious how he's going to get out of this, because it looks like that corporation that's trying to gather all the teenagers that gain powers from the Big Bang protest. It looks like they're really pulling their weight, and they have a lot of power here. So it's going to be interesting to see where this story goes moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it slowed down a little bit for me in terms of pacing in exchange for more character work in this issue, especially the scene between Virgil and his dad, between Static and his dad on the roof, which I thought resonated and was really, really good. We also get a couple of scenes of Virgil's classmates, and that all works really well also. So I expect probably more action next issue with what Hot Streak has done here. And like I said, I hope that Hot Streak isn't being set up to be like the nemesis of Static, right? Where he comes back time and time again and he never really gets punished. Like, I would like to see this guy be put away for a long, long time, be stripped of his powers. I mean, I really want to see him get what he's due.
Well, he just seems
'Cause
like a punk. He doesn't really seem
yeah,
all that well developed. Like he's not a villain that I'm sympathetic with. He's just
yeah,
genuinely a
well,
punk.
yeah,
Like,
because he doesn't have any level of intelligence.
yeah.
He's just sort of conniving. And so yeah, I hope he's not around long. I hope he serves kind of as a plot device for Virgil to sort of learn how to use his powers as static. So all in all, a good solid issue. Like I said, I expect more action next issue. As far as the art goes, it didn't work for me as well as the first couple of issues, where Crisscross was doing layouts and then Draper Ivy was finishing those off and doing the color work. I thought that worked better, because what ended up happening here is the first half of the book, the art feels a little more soft with the way Draper Ivy, who works digitally, as opposed to Crisscross, who's probably more of a traditional artist. Although it does look like he's working digitally now as well, but he's been around a lot longer. But the art, it's not a seamless transition from one artist to the other, especially when you look at things like panel borders and line weights. Those are really where the art looks very, very different. So I prefer when they kind of collaborate together, or go with Nicholas or go with Crisscross. Either one, they're both exceptional artists. I enjoy both of their styles. And I think the melding of the style, like they did in issue 1 and issue 2, worked really, really well. So if I had my choice, we'd go with that. If not, just give the book to one or the other. I hope they don't continue to split it up this way. And it's not to say it's terrible, but again, they are different styles. They're different enough that it doesn't necessarily flow seamlessly from one to the other. And I guess they did sort of try to split it up in that the first half of the book is when Virgil is static, and the second half of the book is when he's out of costume. So I suppose that's why they split it up that way. So could that work going forward? I mean, I guess it could, but again, I would prefer one artist or the other, just to have the art have a more consistent look. So, but that's just a personal preference. Wouldn't be a deal breaker for me, because I'm enjoying the book enough. I'd keep reading it even if that wasn't the case. All right, up next, Teen Titans Academy number 6. Summer break from writer Tim Sheridan. Rafa Sandoval handles the pencils, Jordi Tarragona on the inks, Ulysses Ariel on the colors, and Rob Lee on letters. And this is the start of a brand new arc, which it doesn't really call back to anything we've seen in this series so far, which in a way is a little bit frustrating because we have so many storylines, so many plot threads going on. It would be nice to get some headway on some of those, but instead we're thrown into a brand new story, brand new adventure. So what are your thoughts on this one, Rock?
I actually think that this is actually a storyline that, I hate to say this, but I found myself wondering who all the characters were again, because I forgot who they were. And I think I'll take responsibility for my memory being bad. But I actually wish that there was a summary page at the beginning to basically indicate who all the characters were, because I was actually fairly frustrated. I'll ask again. Can you see me flip the pages?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This is basically, this reminds me a lot of early X-Men comics in a way. This is the students of Teen Titans Academy are going to a place. This is during their summer break, and they're going to basically a place. I can't even remember what it's called. They're going to a place called Beach Pond, which is a safe haven for metahumans. And apparently this is a place where metahumans can go to feel safe and feel not judged and get away from the normal populace. So right away, that's an illusion. I think that reminds me a lot of the X-Men. And I really think maybe it's a little bit heavy-handed, but that's fine. I mean, clearly writer Tim Sheridan, I think, is trying to convey that these students, they want to go to a place where they feel where they feel that they can maybe be themselves and get away from things. But and I guess I can see that because none of these kids, all of these kids definitely look different. I mean, we got Greg Grodd here. We got another kid that we got Chupacabra. We got I guess the Megabat, and we've got Summer, who's got like frost powers, and we've got all these characters we're still getting to know. And when they end up wandering into the town of East Nyack, and they discover that the town is almost deserted, and they ultimately discover that all the people in the town ostracize them when they finally find them, and the people of the town apparently are being mentally manipulated by Gorilla Grodd. And where I think Tim Sheridan tries his best to shine here is in the interactions between all the students, between Stitch, between Greg Grodd, between Chupacabra, between Summer, between all the characters. And I think where this could be better is if I wish it was more apparent who these characters are. It's a lot of these characters you really got to read it tight to even get who their names are. I mean, other than Stitch and Greg and Gorilla Greg and Summer, I would have liked this. Really needed a page, I think, at the beginning to just say who all these characters are. This is not the Teen Titans, okay? This is not the traditional. This isn't Starfire, Dick Grayson, Changeling, Cyborg. This isn't that at all. These are brand new characters that we're not familiar with, and I think a little bit more care should have been taken to show that. I mean, this is a very cliche show. You know, I mean, literally, this is a town where, I mean, this is the 21st century. What are the odds that a town is that everyone's going to have pitchforks? I mean, this just seems really, really odd. I mean, Gorilla Grodd ends up in this small East Nyack town near a lake, and he equips all the people with pitchforks, and they go after these students that are there on holidays, and they're actually in this town to avoid being judged and then here they are, and the very opposite thing happens in terms of what they're actually there to do, and that is have a holiday. Again, it's very tropey, but it does have some character moments. There's probably the most significant one, I suppose, from a character motivation point of view is there's some flirting going on between Twitch and Chupacabra, which I'm not even sure how you'd characterize it. Twitch is non-binary. Chupacabra is, I don't know what he is, sort of like a vampire sort of creature. It's really, really odd. But I guess, I don't know. These characters are kind of likable to me, but at the same time, I feel that this is a story that is maybe ahead of its time and that it's a little bit too soon. I don't feel I know these characters enough that we should be getting a story like this, to be honest. I feel like I want to get to know these characters more before I go on vacation with them. I just feel the timing of this story is wrong, but maybe I'm just being foolish, and maybe I'm just insulting the intelligence of most readers, because I know when I was younger, I was always up for that challenge. But for here, the art here is fantastic. Rafa Sandoval art's fantastic. The inking by Jordi Tarragona is great. The coloring's beautiful by Ulysses Ariola. Rob Leigh on the lettering. This is really good stuff. You get a sense of the ambiance of the town, the darkness. You get a sense that it almost reminds me like they're in a small town, and it's almost like a horror movie. You're watching, summer kids go on vacation. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Teen Titans style. And, again, so I had fun. I just, I'm just wondering if it's going to be for everybody. And maybe it was the mood I was in when I was reading it. But, these characters are likable. I just wish I knew them a little bit more before we got this kind of story. But hey man, we're gonna get some Gorilla Grodd. So how did it hit you, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, you had the exact same reaction that I did, right? Like, we've been talking about Teen Titans Academy and its potential right from the beginning, but then it was Red X. and then it was a Suicide Squad crossover, and now it's them outside of the tower, outside of school, on a camping trip. You got to establish a baseline first. Like you said, we got to be introduced to these characters. We got to get a chance to see them in the academy environment and to learn who they are and to care about them and become invested in the characters. And then you can take them out and do this kind of story. Again, I agree with you. I think it's way too early, and it ends up feeling like I don't have a foundation yet, but we're out there already building the house. I think it has potential. Like you said, the characters are likable. I wish I did know more about them. I wish we hadn't got so much Red X, or we hadn't gotten maybe the Suicide Squad crossover, and we just got some stories of these characters just going to class and getting to know each other. I sort of think back to a lot of what was done across the street at Marvel during the Age of X-Men when they had their school established. And they had a couple of those series that did a very good job of letting you know who those characters were in that setting. We saw them in the classroom, we saw them in the cafeteria, we saw them in their dorm rooms, and it really gave you a sense of who they were in that environment. And granted, we kind of already knew some of those characters before from pre Age of X-Men in the pages of the Uncanny X-Men, but we know some of these characters as well. We know Chupacabra, we know Stitch. So it's the same boat. So I agree with you. A little too soon for this. How successful it is, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Maybe if we get a little more character work in the next issue, Tim Sheridan can kind of turn around. It's not a bad comic by any stretch. Technically it's very well put together. I agree with Rocky that Rafa Sandoval's a superstar in the making. Absolutely amazing art, great transitions. When we do get little character moments, oftentimes it's to his credit, giving reactions between or interactions between two characters. The color work is done very, very well also. So great line work. I was happy to see him back on the book. And so, yeah, it does have potential, which, the Teen Titans Future State had potential. We felt it was a little overstuffed with story, and Teen Titans Academy title has surprised us a little bit with what Tim Sheridan has given us. I think it's almost like he's worried that at any moment he's going to be taken off the book. So, pedal to the metal and just go as fast as I can in terms of pacing, because at any time they could tell me, hey, that was your last issue. I'd rather they tell him, hey, we're going to give you, 20 issues or 18 issues or whatever it is guaranteed, and then we'll reassess at that point. So he can give his stories a little more room to breathe, because I think that's what they need. Just a little more context in terms of character and who these heroes are and why they're doing what they're doing. Why are they at Teen Titans Academy? Why do they want to be heroes and that sort of thing? So a little frustrating, but overall I think it's still a comic that's worth picking up because the potential's there.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, up next we have Infinite Frontier, number 5. This is from writer Joshua Williamson. We have Paul Pelletier, Jesus Moreno, and Tom Derenick on pencils. Norm Ratman, Ralph Fernandez, and Derenick on inks. Hi-Fi does the colors. Tom Napolitano on letters. And I thought this was a monthly book, and then I thought, well, maybe it's weekly or bi-weekly, and then we're getting number 5 this week, and then I think number 6 comes out the very next week. So I have no idea on the schedule. We've talked about it before. We've talked about, I think when issue 4 came out, there's no way they can wrap this all up in 2 issues. They don't. Spoiler alert, because it's already been announced that the kind of the next chunk of story for Infinite Frontier is in another 6-issue mini that's coming called Justice League Incarnate, which, again, I'm going to say what I said before. Just if you're going to do that, just make Infinite Frontier a 12-issue mini. And if you want to put it out, twice a month or whatever, do what you need to do. I just don't understand if it's all the same story, why are you splitting it up into different miniseries? I know the answer. It's so you can get another number 1 issue out there on the racks. But just give me a good story. Forget about the, false bump in sales that you get from a number 1. So that kind of bugs me. But in terms of the story itself, what did you think, Rocky?
I really enjoyed this, man. Joshua Williamson is impressing the hell out of me, and I know we joke about it before. You always tease me because I've been pretty hard on Joshua Williamson in the past, but I'm enjoying. He seems to be doing a decent job on Robin. I'm having fun with Robin, despite some hiccups. And boy, his Infinite Frontier, I'm really enjoying this. I love the story that's building here. What I think Joshua Williamson is doing, arguably even better at times than even Jeff Johns did in Infinite Crisis, dare I say it, is that I feel that this is a character-driven tale leading to the next crisis that is going to hit us in next year in 2022. It's establishing what Darkseid's plan here is. Darkseid has made an offer. Darkseid it's revealed in this issue that Darkseid has created a team that consists of Psycho Pirate, Director Bones, Machine Head, Magog, Extract, Fate, Dr. Savannah, Superwoman. And even the Cameron Chase of Earth 2. He's created this team and he's promised them that, look, his argument is very simple. Darkseid has said, look, Earth Zero, Earth Designated Zero, always gets the best end of things. Throughout all this crisis, we had the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, we had Infinite Crisis, we had Final Crisis, we have Convergence, we have all these crazy crises. And the Earth that always seems to do so well is Earth Designated Zero, Earth Zero. Well, you know what? Darkseid is basically he's recruiting people from all over the multiverse, heroes and villains, saying, look, the real villain here is Earth Zero. They're the ones that seem to cause the problem. And in a twisted kind of way, he's not entirely wrong. It does seem to be that Earth Zero does seem to cause all this havoc. And also, what's interesting here, we get some major revelations in this issue, major revelations. And that is that some people have residual multiversal energies stored inside them that can be exploited. And Darkseid wants to exploit that. And he makes no bones about it. And he tells all the people that are working for him, Director Bones, Machine Head, Psycho Pirate, Magog, all of them. He wants to exploit those energies, but he said, look, let me do whatever I want. I want to crack the multiversal wall. Let me do whatever I want. I promise you I will leave your Earths alone. If you just let me do what I want to do, you can live peacefully and you can take my word for it. Now, leaving aside that perhaps you might say, who on their right mind would trust Darkseid? Which I think that's legitimate criticism. I think a lot of these people are crazy for trusting Darkseid. But when you put Darkseid against the multiversal threats that they've faced, like the Batman Who Laughs and the cosmic gods doing what they want, is Darkseid really that much worse? I mean, at least that's the argument, and you can the mileage on that argument will vary according from reader to reader, but I like the fact here that Darkseid is playing this game. Joshua Williamson has done a good job here establishing what this is, and it's not altogether that complicated. This is simply Darkseid's plan is to use Barry Allen to crack open the multiverse and have access to what lies beyond and control all the worlds in the multiverse. And what happens in this issue is that Justice League Incarnate ends up being attacking the Injustice Incarnate and the Justice Society is along for the ride. President Superman ends up fighting Machine Head. There's multiple revelations here. Of course, we got Roy Harper as the Black Lantern, who plays a special role in all of this because Black Lantern is actually, Darkseid reveals that he wants Roy Harper to be his Omega Lantern. And that's what's particularly interesting. And it's revealed that when Flashpoint happened, one of the most beloved storylines in DC, which was written by Jeff Johns, is the Flashpoint storyline. And of course, we had that great DC cartoon, Flashpoint Paradox. It's revealed here that the Flashpoint, that caused ripples not only on Earth Zero, but throughout the multiverse. And it had very negative effects on Earth 8, for example. Earth 8 is almost like the Marvel version of the DC universe, and it made Earth 8 a lot more darker, and it caused a lot of negative effects. And that's interesting that Flashpoint had that impact. So Flashpoint didn't just lead to the New 52, it caused chaos all over the place. Another revelation is that Machine Head is revealed as the person who killed Earth 23 Lex Luthor, and apparently the Earth 23 Lex Luthor, President Superman, that's Calvin Alice's Lex Luthor, was killed by Machine Head because even Lex Luthor of Earth 23 questioned Darkseid's logic and questioned the decision to go along with Darkseid. And another revelation is that Machine Head is the one who called upon he's the one who dragged Flashpoint Batman into the scenario because he wants to punish and torture Flashpoint Batman for Flashpoint. I mean, the hero-villain connection to the multiverse's powers, it's that all the heroes and villains who are on Earth Omega, because remember that their ships crash landed, their multiversal bleed starships, they ended up crash landing on Earth Omega. And all these heroes, the heroes and villains in this story that are on Earth Omega, they've got multiversal energies built up in them. And that feeds Earth Omega, which helps create a prison world. And it creates chains that bind the world. And so there's no more travel or connection between the worlds unless Darkseid says so. Darkseid is controlling it because of all these chains that are being created as a result of all these multiversal energies being channeled through the Flash as he breaks the barrier, allowing these chains to form, originating from Earth Omega, so that Darkseid can control the traveling between the universes. And that's what Darkseid wants to do. And the multiversal barriers that are created, Roy Harper's the Omega Lantern, and it's powered by his suffering. So while somebody like Hal Jordan, it's his fearlessness that powers the Green Lantern ring, when it comes to the Black Lantern, the Omega Lantern, it's actually powered by Roy Harper's suffering. And there's a great scene here where Roy Harper stands up to Psycho Pirate, and he finds out through Psycho Pirate that Luen, his daughter, is still alive, and he doesn't, he sacrifices his life. Roy Harper is prepared to basically kill himself to give the other heroes a chance because he doesn't want to become one of Darkseid's puppets. And so he says he's got more than enough power, and he's willing to endure the suffering if it means that if his daughter's still alive on Earth Zero, he doesn't want to become a puppet to Darkseid, and he's willing to sacrifice himself. But before he can do that, Darkseid makes an appearance, and he's got Roy Harper, his Omega Lantern, wrapped in chains, and it's just, man, I love this issue. I'm so looking forward to this. Of course, you and I have already read issues 6, which comes out after this. I'm not going to ruin it and spoil it for anybody here, but man, things are going to look fantastic going into the summer of 2022, man. I'm so excited for this. I give full props to Joshua Williamson. I'm so excited for where this is headed. And man, I don't know, man. Tell me you're as excited as I am, Jace.
I'm not. I'm glad that you are. I'm glad you're enjoying it. There's a lot of good here, but it's not resonating for me as much as it is for you. And part of that probably has to do with, like I was talking about, the story structure, the way they're setting it up. And I've just flipped through this issue a couple of times because I've already read issue 6, and I wanted to make sure I don't talk about. There's a couple of things that are in issue 6 that are really cool that I appreciated, but I don't want to spoil them here, obviously. So I did enjoy this. I am very curious to see how the story shifts, and now it's Justice League Incarnate, and they're going to be the focus for the next issue, or for the next series rather, and how the story continues. But what happens in issue 6, it feels like it's going to have a bit of a different tone, and I just don't know that works for me. This is all the same story. Everything Joshua Williamson has been doing since he sort of started being the showrunner for whatever reason over there at DC, it's all one big story. So just put it in one big series. And I just find it so interesting because even Williamson himself, he was in that same boat as Tynion, right? Like, they pitched stuff for 5G. None of it really resonated with Didio or who was ever making the choice for 5G. And Tynion and Williamson both thought they were going to be just doing creator-owned stuff, or maybe go over to Marvel or do something else. They didn't think they were going to have any DC work at all. And it went from that to all of a sudden Tynion being the driving force behind Batman, and Williamson being the driving force behind everything else, practically. At least in the main DC universe. So, we can argue about how successful it's been, if it's worked or not, with everything they've tried to shoehorn in with repurposing 5G stories as future state, and bringing in a lot of new blood and new talent, and they seem to have gotten their footing, and a lot of the stories that are coming out from them are good. Some of them are great. But is this working for me 100%? No, it's not. And part of the reason, I think, is just a difference in style. Like if we go back and we look at things like Crisis on Infinite Earths, Infinite Crisis, even Final Crisis to some extent, even though that was written by Grant Morrison, and we always know his stuff's out there like Pluto, but especially Infinite Crisis, Jeff Johns, Crisis on Infinite Earths, with Wolfman handling a lot of that, George Perez art. They were so rooted into the fabric of the DC universe, the characters, the history, and despite them being giant events, especially Crisis on Infinite Earth, it really was paced pretty well considering the breadth of that story. It's why, in my mind, it's still kind of the gold standard for a big summer blockbuster of a comic event. And granted, it had tons of crossovers to kind of flesh it out and make it feel like a more coherent story. But I never felt like, at any time that I've read it, and at this point I've probably read it, I don't know, 15, 20 times, it never felt choppy. I never felt like I was missing chunks of the story. Fast forward all these years later to who's been running the big events most recently, Scott Snyder, who, I love Scott. I think he's incredibly talented. He's a great writer, great guy. But what he did on Justice League felt choppy. What he did on DC Dark Knight's Metal felt choppy. What he did on Death Metal felt very choppy. It felt like we didn't get the whole story. And knowing Scott the way that I do, and knowing how his mind works to some extent, and these big ideas that he has, it comes down to bandwidth, right? What can be drawn on the page in this amount of time? How many pages do you have to actually tell the story? And him having to leave things on the cutting room floor because there's just not room for it. And now I feel like, to some extent, Joshua Williamson is falling into the same trap. But to make it even worse, we're not even putting it all in one title. I hate to keep beating that horse, but if this is all the Infinite Frontier story, then just put it in the Infinite Frontier book. And if you don't know how many issues it's going to take, then don't even say it's a limited series. Just make it take as long as it's going to take.
Yeah. Well, we know that this is a much longer story than that. We know that it's going to.
Yes. Yeah. But that's my point. The fact that we're going from this Infinite Frontier story to now Justice League Incarnate, which is the same story, but with a slightly different focus and from different perspective. And then we're going to have another story, another miniseries after that. If this is that big of a story, then just put it all in one thing, And I know DC doesn't exactly have patience right now, and they also don't have the bandwidth, because honestly, it feels like the scope of this story, what needs to happen, this needs to be a story like 52 or Countdown or something like that, where it's a weekly series and you have multiple writers and you have multiple artists, and we get a chunk of the story every week. And there's a bunch of different storylines, because that's what it's been, right? Like, this is the first issue 5 of Infinite Frontier is the first time I'm reviewing one of these issues, and I'm not saying, well, there's all these disparate storylines and they haven't come together yet. Everything has come together now, and everything is together in issue 6 as well. Does it split back out in Justice League Incarnate? I have no idea. I haven't read any of that yet, but I think so. I think that's likely. So they probably didn't have the time, and obviously with all the shifting personnel and shifting priorities and editorial decisions and whatnot, they couldn't plan it out the way they did with 52 or with Countdown or with Batman Eternal or any of the other weekly series that DC's done, in the past 5 or 10 years, where they plan those things like a year ahead of time, right? And they had X amount of issues already in the can, and then you do something like Batman Eternal where you spend a whole year releasing one issue each week. If Williamson had gotten to do that, I think this would be much more successful. For me, it just feels like there are things that we as readers and fans need to know that are slipping through the cracks. And the less you know about DC history, the more kind of lost you're going to feel. Are there good concepts? 100%. And some of those great ideas are coming in issue 6. Am I curious what happens? I'm very curious what happens. And I'm even more curious what the end game is. Like what comes next? We've already been told that this, I think I read or heard Williamson say that there's basically 3 miniseries that then lead into a big event. So Infinite Crisis is the first, Justice League Incarnate is the second, then we'll get a third, probably another 6 issue, and then it's going to lead into DC's next big event, which we know is going to have Crisis in the title, and that may be the thing that, if anything that will bring Alfred back, or if they do decide to de-age Jonathan Kent, or maybe dial back on the multiverse of multiverses. But that'll be the next big thing, right? The thing that is the next publishing initiative after Infinite Frontier will come out of whatever Crisis comes next. So I agree with you. There's cool ideas here. But again, it just feels like DC's biting off a little bit more than it can chew. Not because they haven't been able to do this successfully in the past, but just because of the sort of limitations of personnel and the timing that kind of, launched into this maybe a little prematurely, probably without really a choice, because you had to do something. You had to have some kind of noise coming out of Future State, some kind of publishing initiative, some kind of branding. And so they just had to kick this off. But it feels, in a little way, it feels a little bit rushed and like some things are slipping through the cracks. And I'll say the same thing about the art, because every one of these artists is a talented artist, but that it's not divided up in any way that necessarily makes sense. It's just like you draw this page and you draw this page and you draw this page, and it ends up feeling, it doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel like it doesn't get me excited when I look at this art. Paul Pelletier and Jesus Moreno are especially. I'm a big fan of both of those guys, but this art is not up to their usual standards. So I think it's good, not great. I'm more excited about what it bodes for the future than what's actually being told here. Like, honestly, my favorite thing about Infinite Frontier is seeing some characters we haven't seen in a long time, like Lady Quark. And then there's somebody that's coming in issue 6 that we haven't seen in a really long time either. It's been teased in various comic book websites that somebody that there's a certain Crisis character that's coming back. So that's been the coolest thing, seeing some of these characters, and seeing the new design of Psycho Pirate is really, really cool. I really, really like the way he looks. And also we see Director Bones back in the old Todd McFarlane designed
the old outfit,
costume. Yeah, when he was Mr. Bones instead of Director Bones. So yeah, I'm not quite as excited as you are, but I will admit, after reading issue 6, that Infinite Frontier is as good, if not slightly better than I expected after reading the first couple of issues. I'm very curious to see.
I can't wait to talk about issue 6.
Yeah, very curious to see what happens in Justice League Incarnate #1. Like I said, if it's a big shift in focus. So, all right. Up next, we have the Harley Quinn Annual 2021 from Stephanie Phillips. Art is by David LaFuente, Marco Failla, and John Samarova. Colors by Miguel Muerto. Letters by Andworld Design. I don't really have much to say here. It's a lot of Harley Quinn, and a lot of the new character that we saw in Harley Quinn recently, Keepsake, who we find out has some history with Harley. I thought this was okay. Probably the most interesting aspect for me of this was this made me appreciate Riley Rossmo's art more on Harley Quinn, and not because I think this art here is bad. I think this art is fine, and it's clearly a much cleaner style than what Rossmo does. But I don't feel that it necessarily told the story any better than Rossmo's art. It's not worse than Rossmo's art in terms of telling the story, but Rossmo's art tells the Harley Quinn stories that Stephanie Phillips is writing just as well as this art. So I guess in that way, it's kind of a backwards compliment for Rossmo, in that I think his art is just as good on Harley Quinn as this art is. So, but yeah, that's really all I have to say. It was nice to look at in terms of the colors. I think the color is probably my favorite part of the artwork. And Stephanie Phillips definitely continues to find her Harley voice. She does a great job. Harley feels very authentic in her hands. So, what did you think, Rocky?
Well, I think that this is writer Stephanie Phillips is focusing on a new villain for Harley called Keepsake, and I will say that one of the reasons why I was trying to figure out what was a little bit off about Stephanie's approach that was just eating at me a little bit, and it occurred to me that one of the things that sort of threw me off is that this is taking place during the build up to Future State, and the only thing that seems a little bit off to me is her when she writes Harley Quinn. Harley is not looking for Poison Ivy as diligently as I would expect her to, and in fact, she never even did that last issue. Or we reviewed Harley Quinn #6 just last week. And she was with Catwoman, and Catwoman even knows where Poison Ivy is, because Poison Ivy is in two halves right now. And I think that Stephanie Phillips has the unenviable task of trying to write Harley Quinn in a very humorous, comedic way in her own title, but yet the Harley Quinn that's being written and being involved in the build up to Future State facing the Magistrate. She's very much in love with Poison Ivy and is supposed to be looking for Poison Ivy. And I think in the juggling of that, it's part of me. I find it hard to reconcile this joking Poison Ivy in this annual, who is, trying to take down Keepsake but it just seems a little bit jarring to me. Now, having said that, this is entertaining. It's a little bit tropey, I think. This Keepsake is obsessed with Harley. He used to be obsessed with the Joker, and he was jealous of Harley, and because Harley was always the focus of the Joker's attention when he wanted to be the focus of the Joker's attention. And there's some funny moments here. Harley thinks that when she first meets Keepsake, he says his real name is Eli Kaufman, and and she, of course, she doesn't recognize him. She thinks that he looks like a flasher that you'd see on a street, and he does seem to be very obsessed. But Keepsake thinks that Harley owes him an apology. Meanwhile, Kevin is going through essentially going through Batman's rogues gallery, trying to find somebody to help him find Harley. And so it ends up that Kevin talks to the Penguin, he talks to Cheshire, Harvey Dent, the Riddler, Firefly, and all trying to find out where this where Keepsake might be. And ultimately he finally locates Keepsake. Mr. Freeze finally helps him, and we get a very interesting side of Kevin here, because Kevin at one point actually freaks out on Mr. Freeze, and he shows his more psychotic side, and ultimately he ends up locating Harley, because Keepsake takes Harley out for dinner and wants to sweet talk her and sort of recruit her to his cause. He wants Harley to be his sidekick, which is kind of ironic because Harley wants to be Batman's new sidekick or / partner. And so I think there's some analogies there between maybe Harley's desire to maybe be more respected by Batman. Keepsake you almost get a sense that Keepsake wants some respect from Harley, vis-a-vis their past affiliation with the Joker. But in any event, it obviously doesn't work out. Keepsake ultimately ends up being defeated, and I gotta say this was a long issue. There were some interesting sort of character moments. I felt this was a little bit long. I thought it dragged on. It was basically Kevin just going on almost like a treasure hunt through Batman's rogues gallery, trying to find Harley, while Harley's having these humorous anecdotes or these conversations with Keepsake, and I it's not bad. I actually would have preferred I would have preferred a little bit more focus on maybe. I wish Harley would have mentioned Poison Ivy a little bit more, as opposed more so than she did. But it's all good. It's interesting to see how Kevin reacts. And again, I think that Kevin has a psychotic side that is maybe a sign of things to come because he's a seemingly polite, fat, overweight guy who's Harley's sidekick. But he clearly, he's got this giant K on his shirt, and he definitely has. He threatened to kill Mr. Freeze slowly if he didn't help him out. And in any event, it was okay. I actually one commentator I note online made the comment that it would be nice to see more mainstream artists try to draw Kevin, because Kevin's got that weird tattoo under his double chin there. It'd be nice to see how more mainstream artists would draw Kevin. But overall, I thought this was okay. I want Stephanie Phillips to. I think she shines more in the relationship. I think she knows Harley's character better than this story would reflect. And I'm looking forward to Stephanie Phillips maybe script Harley finding Poison Ivy and scripting that relationship. I'd be really curious to see how she approaches that moving forward.
Yeah, I think we'll get that or we're supposed to be getting that in Fear State. So I guess if you're looking forward to that, look there. But yeah, this definitely it could have been called Kevin, 2021 annual, because it really was a Kevin story, not a Harley story. So. All right, let's move on to the last book we're going to talk about in this episode, and then there will be, everybody, we are going to cover the Aquaman 80th anniversary, but since there's 10 stories in that, we're going to do it as its own episode. But the last book we're going to talk about here is Batman Superman Annual 2021. So this is from writer Jean Luen Yang, and it's a flip book, which definitely works better, speaking of physical versus digital. It works way better in physical form as opposed to in digital. So there's two stories. There's Batman and Robin in the world of tomorrow, and then there's Superman in basically the Gotham City world. So the two characters have sort of switched places. Superman in the world of night, if you will. So the characters that Jean Luen Yang created for his archive of world storylines, they've decided to swap, and they even discuss it in the story how they feel like the various villains that they are going to have to go up again, they would be better off switching worlds, at least until the villains are taken care of. So the Superman in the world of night is also written by Jean Luen Yang, but the art in that story is by Francovilla, and the colors are by him as well, with letters by Troy Petrie, and then the Batman and Robin in the world of tomorrow, also written by Jean Luen Yang, but we have Paul Pelletier handling the pencils, Mick Gray on inks, Hi-Fi on colors, and Troy Petrie does the letters for that side. I know it's a flip book, and that does help to sort of mitigate this somewhat, but these are two completely different art styles. And Francovilla is a fantastic artist, and his stuff is especially good in horror and kind of moody and darker stories. This clearly is not that, right? This is a superhero story. And you would think, based on the fact that he did did the art in a Joker issue recently teamed up with James Tynion, the writer, that they would have given him the Batman and Robin side of it. But maybe because it's the world of tomorrow and that needs a more clean style, I don't know. Like Paul Pelletier's art is just so, the line work is so much more fine. There's so many more details. So I thought it was an odd choice. I thought Francovilla was an odd choice. And again, this is not to say that I don't think Francovilla is a fantastic artist, because he is supremely talented. And I love his art in things like was Afterlife with Archie, and the Jughead howling, or where Jughead's a werewolf, whatever. Like, that is the perfect type of story for Francovilla to be drawing. A Superman story, on the other hand, not quite so much. But, not to disparage his work at all, because he is a fantastic storyteller, and his transitions from panel to panel, his sense of storytelling, the angles that he uses, camera zooming in and out, all of that is perfect. But he does have a very heavy line, and it does make his art feel a little bit static at times. It doesn't flow, doesn't have that sort of kinetic energy that you necessarily would want in a superhero comic, as opposed to Paul Pelletier, who's much more in the DC house style, right? Really fine lines, a lot of detail in the background, a lot of textures, like very much in that sort of Jim Lee style. As far as the stories,
it's more reminiscent of Ivan Reis, which was who started off the
yep
all the issues.
Yeah, and again, you could say Ivan Reis heavily influenced by Jim Lee as well. As far as the stories, they're fine. Nothing to write home about. I feel like that archive of the world story was very inspired and was a lot of fun. This feels a little extraneous, like doesn't really feel necessary, but it does capture the same feel of fun that the Archive of World storyline had. And Rocky and I were talking before we started recording. Curious how they're gonna collect all this, right? Like, we know we're getting 7 issues of Batman Superman. We're already done with the Archive of World storyline, so now we're getting a standalone Calendar Man storyline. But then we have this annual that ties into the Archive of World storyline as well. So are we going to get 8 issues collected in the latest Batman Superman trade? And really the equivalent of 9, since this is an annual and it's double sized, double the pages. I mean, I have no idea. I haven't seen it solicited yet. But all that being said, again, I did think this worked pretty well. If I had to pick between the 2 stories, I did like the Batman Robin story more, but I couldn't really say if that's just because I like the art style better. It's just more my cup of tea. I sort of feel like that's why. And if you swapped the art teams, I might end up liking the Superman story more. But ultimately, I thought they were both good. They both worked. And they sure, like Rocky said, they sure didn't take a very big break between Archive IO stories. We just barely finished it last week, and now we've already got another book that's set in that world. So, but ultimately, I enjoyed it. What did you think, Rocky?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of Francovilla, his art. I really like it. I slightly preferred his darker version and his artistic sensibilities in the first story, only because I do have a slight bias. I do like his art. I loved his art on Joker #5, and I actually liked the story because I liked that the hint of the romance between Superman and Lois Lane, or who was the Spider Lady in Gotham. So I kind of like that angle, and I kind of like seeing Superman interact with Commissioner Gordon, and just to see Francovilla's style with him using the film strip. It's obviously the line work is totally different, but it does seem to have that its own sense of artistic style as well, with heavier line work. And remembering, of course, that we're talking about the Archive of Worlds, where there's different worlds, there's nothing to say that you can't have those divergent artistic styles, and that I think it can work. Admittedly, it is an artistic shift that is significantly different than those first 7 issues from Batman Superman issues 16 through 21, where we got mostly Ivan Reis's artistic sensibilities and his style. So this Francovilla style, this does stand out a bit in that regard. But again, I enjoyed it, and I do think that, I can't believe I'm saying this. This almost feels like we're getting too much of a good thing, because you and I both talked about how much we love just the whole approach with the film strip and cutting into the different realities and the universes through the metaphor and through the symbolism of the film strip, and even at the end of issue, I think it was 21 that we reviewed, I think it was last week, where Darkseid himself is going to be, perhaps utilizing the Archive of Worlds moving forward as a way to sort of infiltrate different aspects of the Omniverse. And so it's a great idea, but I think that it's an odd criticism, and maybe it's an unfair one, but it is an odd criticism for me to say that maybe we got too much of a good thing by Gene Luen Yang. Sometimes it's better to just give us, maybe 4 or 5 issues would have been suffice, and then come back at a later date. But, look, this is as complaints go. This isn't really a complaint. It's more of an maybe an underhanded compliment is what I'm doing. But yeah, overall, pretty good.
I think that again that sort of thicker line that Francovilla uses, like when you look at the borders for the film strip, it doesn't look quite as good when he draws it as when Pelletier draws it, or Yvonne Reese. But again, it's just a difference in style. So
yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for this episode. Like I said, everybody, there is an Aquaman 100-page 80th anniversary issue that we're going to cover in a separate episode, just because like I said, it's 10 stories. It's almost a full episode in and of itself. So we want to be sure that we give it its due, and everybody has a chance to check it out. There's a couple of trade paperbacks that are coming out this week as well. There's a Batman Adventures, Cat Got Your Tongue trade paperback that's coming out. There's a Batman Year Zero trade paperback that's hitting stands. Swamp Thing's New Roots trade paperback is also out this week. And I thought there was one. There's the Preacher 20th Anniversary Omnibus Volume 2 hardcover. If you're a big Preacher fan, you might want to check that out. So a few different hardcovers out from DC this week. And for me, again, I'm still just trying to get caught up. Day job has been absolutely insane. I don't even have any creator-owned interviews. People have been reaching out, and I've just been telling them, I'm sorry, I'm too busy. I don't even have any creator-owned spotlights coming this week, at least not as of yet. That could always change at any moment. So what about you, Rocky? You have anything coming up that you want to tease?
Well, I decided I'm going to wait till Infinite Crisis number 6 before I do all my Infinite Frontier review. I think I'm going to wait on that. But in the meantime, no, I'm probably just going to relax, and I might do a couple of cover videos, speculation videos, but I just, like you, it's hard to find the time right now, and work is quite busy, and it actually takes time for me. I try to prepare as best I can when we do these reviews, because my memory's not what it used to be. I gotta take notes when I talk these comics with you. I just can't remember off the top of my head, man. I don't know how you do it, but I need to take notes, and when I don't, I get all flustered, and sometimes I'm sure I feel like I sound like a rambling moron, but it's a cross I'll have to bear.
Yeah, I in no way do I want to blame it on DC Comics, but the fact that I've only been putting out creator-owned stuff and then DC Spotlight and the New Comics Wednesday for a couple months now, just because DC's putting out so much output. It takes me 3 times as long to read. Used to take me an hour, and I was done with all the DC books for the week. And now it takes me like 3 hours. So it cuts into time to read other things and talk about other things. But definitely hoping to get back to it at some point. Because I know you guys miss the Marvel chronology and the Star Wars stuff, and the X-Men episodes and all that. So hopefully we'll get there at some point. But all that being said, don't forget, everybody, if you're listening to us on the podcast, head over to YouTube. Look for the Comic Boom YouTube channel. You can find it in the show notes on the page as well. Make sure you subscribe to Rocky's channel, Comic Boom with an exclamation point. Give this video a like, ring that notification bell so you know whenever there's new content coming out. Conversely, if you're listening to us or watching us on YouTube and you haven't already subscribed to the Comic Source YouTube or podcast rather, whatever podcast app you use, you can go and subscribe. It'll be there directly in your RSS feed on your podcast app, or Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, whatever you listen to your podcasts on. We're on every platform. So we appreciate the support as always, and we will talk to you next time.
See you.